Steve Crum of the Kansas City Kansan calls this film a fascinating, original, definitely ahead of its time fantasy. Jeffrey M. Anderson of Combustible Celluloid calls it a classic example of pre-code Hollywood getting away with all kinds of Depression-era madness. And Michael W. Phillips Jr. of Goat Dogs Movies says, of all the crackpot political films to come out of Hollywood, this is surely the crackpottest and must really be seen to be believed. On this episode of Ruined Childhoods, we decide the fate of Gabriel over the White House.
Sequel. Reboot. Which one will it be? It's the Ruined Childhoods podcast.
Greetings, Starfighters! How goes it?
Dan, it goes well for me. How does it go for you, Dan?
It goes.
It goes. Whenever I hear the name Jeffrey Anderson...
My name is Anderson!
Yes, I think of Soap Dish instantly. So when there are, I think, a couple of film reviewers named Jeffrey Anderson, and they always make me think of Soap Dish.
Well, I think we've kind of cited Jeffrey Anderson, the same Jeffrey Anderson, a few times, and what's funny is so today we're recording this on February 15th, 2021. Correct. Yeah. I'm like, I hope you're checking to make sure I got the date right, because I'm not 100%. But so today, one of the like just Twitter things happening today has been like a post a line from a movie that only its fans would know. And among the many lines that came to mind was like, "Stop calling me Mr. Loman." And then just a bunch of other Kevin Kline lines. Soap Dish is so great.
It is, but that's not what we're here to talk about.
No. We're here. We're talking about. We're going to the back wall deep tracks here. To talk about Gabriel over the White House.
Right, and before we talk about Gabriel over the White House, there's a couple of little sequel, prequel, reboot, remake news bits. The one that I've seen posted about most is the Mr. and Mrs. Smith television series that is coming out with Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Donald Glover. So I am excited about that. That's such a cool pairing. And the movie Mr. and Mrs. Smith was... it was good. It's fun. I think that for most people, the appeal is watching Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt during this controversial time in their personal lives. And but I think that the movie definitely holds its own. And I think that in the hands of people like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and Donald Glover, I only see it going in interesting, different directions.
Yeah, it definitely set up a lot of, it would actually be I guess prior to this announcement, would have been an interesting film to talk about because it does set up, there's a lot of things that are kind of periphery to the main plot of Mr. and Mrs. Smith that are like call for speculation. But, this is Mr. and Mrs. Smith was the movie that Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie first got together on.
Right.
As it was originally supposed to be.
Controversially.
Yeah, well, he was with Jennifer Aniston at the time, I think.
Indeed. Yes.
It's hard. I can't keep up.
Famously,
yes, with Jennifer Aniston. And it was originally supposed to be Nicole Kidman playing.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah. And I don't know if it was like she an injury or for some reason it did not.
Yeah.
She, as we all know, and
as
now it'll be,
know.
I guess, Phoebe Waller-Bridge. It'll be interesting to see how closely, if they're kind of trying to reboot it with the same plot or build off of what's already been established. So I guess we'll wait and see.
I know, I'm excited. And one other piece of news is that there is a sequel in the works for Face Off. Have you heard about this?
Is it a sequel or a remake?
So what's interesting is the article that I saw on IGN.com. The headline is actually Face Off sequel in the works with Godzilla vs. Kong director, but when I saved the link, they must have updated it. Yeah, they updated it, because when I saved it, it definitely said that it was going to be a remake. And it says, contrary to reports regarding this project to date, director Adam Wingard, the Godzilla vs. Kong director, has clarified that his Face Off film will be a direct sequel to the 1997 action movie, not a remake or reimagining. And it quotes him by saying, "I would never reimagine or remake Face Off. It's a perfect action movie. Simon Barrett and I are writing a direct sequel," with little smiley faces. So that's exciting.
Okay. All right.
I'm willing to ride this wave and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about Face Off.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. And I don't know if it's one that we'll come back to at some point. But first of all, with a lot of movies, I think it's about 20 to 30 minutes too long. And unlike other movies, I think I could probably pick at least 20 minutes to cut from it. I dislike, I shouldn't say I dislike, but for me, Nicolas Cage so outweighs Travolta in both roles. Like I don't like the Travolta acting crazy Travolta, right? Ain't it cool? Like in Broken Arrow,
yeah.
And I don't enjoy him in those roles. He always seems like he's playing it up, like he's desperately trying to not be likable and be crazy. Whereas Nicolas Cage, it is just everything all at once.
Yeah.
I thought that Nicolas Cage was better, as both Castor Troy, right, and as whatever John Travolta's character. See, I can't even remember the character's name.
Yeah, it's the less interesting one, that's for sure. The guy who touches his family's face a lot.
Yeah. There's just some other weird stuff in that, and I don't love it as much as others do.
Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Dan, is there anything else you want to talk about with the last movie that we watched, The Man, starring James Earl Jones?
No, I have nothing to add about that.
The only thing I want to say is that the more I think about it, the more I really enjoyed it, and I'm glad that we gave ourselves the opportunity to watch it. And I feel very similarly about the movie that we're talking about today, Gabriel Over the White House.
Yeah, and before we move into that, though, I do have some, we're celebrating Black excellence,
yes,
particularly in film and cinema. So I have to bring in. I've got some more trivia for you here.
Let's hear it.
So, this man was the first African-American director, and I will give you a little bit more information. He was the first person he's the first African-American filmmaker who formed his own movie production company and in 1919 he made his first film called The Homesteader. And it starred an African-American actress named Evelyn Preer.
Oh, cool. I'm not going to know this one. I already throw in the towel.
Yeah, so we're talking about Oscar Micheaux here.
Okay.
Who was born, he was one of 11 children of former slaves. He was born near Metropolis, Illinois, grew up in Great Bend, Kansas, and he also homesteaded a farm in an all-white area of South Dakota, and he based his film. He didn't base The Homesteader on that, but in the film, his film The Exile, which was the first talkie he made, first feature film with sound he made. The central character moves from Chicago to buy and operate a ranch in South Dakota. He is also known for introducing the world to Paul Robeson in the film, and he was the director of Body and Soul.
Okay.
So,
very interesting.
Admittedly have not seen any of his movies, but he was producing films from 1919 all the way through 1948 to his last film, Betrayal.
Wow. That's a long stretch.
Yeah, he wrote, produced, and directed 44 feature-length films and wrote 7 novels. One of them was a national bestseller.
Wow. What's really interesting is that when you look at filmographies for a lot of, especially actors, during the 20s and 30s, you'll see like 75 films. But then you look at the years and then it's all within like 4 years.
Yeah.
I think that they just don't have the types of shooting schedules that they do now where things, can take months and months and months. But they just knocked them out.
I mean, it was also one of those things where it's like you worked for a studio and you went from
on to the next one
set to the next. And let me see if there's anything else I should include. Yeah, so I guess the one other film of his that I want to point out is his film Within Our Gates, which was, I don't know how overt it was, but an attack on the racism in The Birth of a Nation. D.W. Griffith's, movie all about the Ku Klux Klan and how awesome they were, according to D.W. Griffith.
Right. Yeah.
No, not according
our
to
opinions.
No. But that's what I actually, if I was going to pick one Oscar Micheaux film to watch, I'd be really interested to see that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Although sounds like there's a lot of Micheaux films to choose from. That's for sure.
There certainly are. So I encourage, it's like to have never heard his name before, to have not known his name. I feel like that's, that's where we got to start. So
right. And I feel like that's something that a lot of modern cinema seems to be doing lately, is telling these stories of these lesser known people in Black history. And I mean, I just watched Judas and the Black Messiah, and those are people who are extremely important figures that either they get overshadowed or they are kind of stripped from history a little bit. And
like Fred Hampton,
for sure. Yeah. And
I mean, Bobby Seale is probably
Bobby Seale is the one that the
Black
best.
Panthers, yeah.
Yeah. But then absolutely Fred Hampton is one that isn't really talked about that much. And I think that the portrayal of him by Daniel Kaluuya is excellent. And Lakeith Stanfield, as any of our listeners know, we love Lakeith Stanfield, is awesome, as he was the FBI informant who went undercover in the Black Panther Party in Chicago. But just such a great, fascinating story. And it's these people who have been part of Black history that we don't ever hear about, and their names get buried. And it's cool to find out about them. So Dan, thank you for educating me, as well as probably our listeners. I mean, if anybody out there is familiar with Micheaux and wants to talk about him at all, you can email us at ruinchildhoodspot@gmail.com, or give us a shout on some of our socials. But cool.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. I feel like this is the platform, and this is the response.
Black History Month, and this is what we have to be doing during it, is educating ourselves. about Black history.
It's what we want to be doing.
Yeah. And we are actually recording this episode on President's Day. And as we are actually wrapping up our month of movies that are all about fictional presidents. We kicked it off with Dave, then we brought it around to Air Force One. We've got The Man, and then this one is the first ever depiction of a fictional president on film, Gabriel over the White House. Oh, yeah. It was really fascinating.
1933.
Yeah, and it's on
March 1933. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's on Turner Classic Movies, I believe, if you have their platform to watch on, as well as Hulu. If you have the live TV function on Hulu, you can watch it there. It's really fascinating. It really predicts a lot of things. It's always so relevant in a lot of the things that come up in this. But Dan, before we go too far, should we do a synopsis?
Go for it.
Okay, so getting into this, I want to just mention, this is historically significant because this is the first depiction of a fictional president on film, but it's another first. Dan, especially in the 90s, a lot of movies did songs that kind of maybe played during the ending credits that talk about they lay out the whole plot of the movie, right? I think that Gabriel Over the White House might be the first movie to ever do that, and it does it with a song that comes up over and over and over again in the movie Battle Hymn of the Republic, and I found it, and I want to play it for you.
The brand new president seems like a really awesome guy, but he doesn't give the darndest if the jobless live or die. Then he injures his cabeza, making him see eye to eye with victims of the Depression. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. He seems like a different guy. The Congress and the Senate think that he's out of his mind, so he declares martial law for the good of humankind, and he makes all of the members of his cabinet resign and sets up a federal jobs program. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. Everybody gets a job. The country's also victim to a really awful dude. A mobster named Nick Diamond has a rotten attitude. He and his associates are not able to collude, 'cause the president orders them dead. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. There's no more organized crime. Now the president's agenda includes one more hanging threat. He wants international debt and conflict put to bed. So he signs a big peace treaty before keeling over debt, and he signs with Lincoln's quill. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. Gabriel over the White House. He was guided by an angel.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
Wow. Yeah, you really didn't see that pop up until much later.
The 80s, maybe. maybe some in the 70s, but
I
yeah,
feel like
really
the
much
Dragnet
later.
Rap might have been the first one in 1987.
The Dragnet Rap, that's
The
right.
Dragnet Rap, yeah.
Yeah, so this movie, it's all about President Judd Hammond, played by Walter Houston, father of John Huston, grandfather of Angelica Houston. He won the Oscar for Treasure of the Sierra Madre. It's also got, and I'm not going to know how to pronounce his name, Franchot-Tone? Franchot-Tone, who plays Beak, Hartley Beekman, who's the secretary to the president, who was nominated for an Oscar on Mutiny on the Bounty. And, you know, he was married to Joan Crawford. He made some appearances on The Twilight Zone. We've also got Karen Morley as Pendula Malloy. She was blacklisted in 1947. She testified before the House of Un-American Activities Committee and refused to answer questions about her alleged Communist Party membership. She maintained her political activism for the rest of her life. And in 1954, she ran unsuccessfully for lieutenant governor of New York on the American Labor Party ticket. So I wonder if she was either inspired by this movie or if she was in this movie as, you know, because of her personal beliefs, because so much of this movie is, you know, it's Depression era and somebody's got to do something about this huge national problem. And this guy who becomes President Hammond, you know, he just got in there to, like, you know, keep the party alive and keep the party, you know, at the top of the heap, and is kind of pushing everything off as local problems and trying not to get involved. But yeah, it's a really dense movie. There's a lot going on.
And there's so much going on that doesn't only foreshadow more recent events in political history, but eerily foreshadows things that were about to happen or were happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and to put it in perspective,
we'll get to that a little bit later for sure.
Yeah.
What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, so like, so this comes out in March 1933. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is inaugurated in January 1933. So it's this weird kind of parallel because as we heard in the brilliant song there, you know, he creates a federal jobs program. And this was kind of before the New Deal. Yeah. But not long. So it's really fascinating to think how this movie that has been largely forgotten might have been a pretty significant influence.
Totally. Yeah. Who knows? So just speaking about the film itself and the, you know, it starts off with the inauguration, which, you know, having just watched an inauguration, I got to say they did a really good job of, you know, making it feel like an inauguration. I mean, seeing all the people hanging on the Capitol building the way that they were plays a little bit differently after the events of the other month, but it's certainly very... Yeah, very surprising to, you know, see it and be like, wow, they, you know, for 1933, they did a really good job of kind of replicating the situation, considering the fact that, like, there haven't been, I mean, I'm sure that there were movies that featured actual presidents leading up to this.
Walter Houston, I think, had played Abraham Lincoln prior to this.
That is true. So, but it's very early cinema. They don't have a lot of the things dialed in as much as they certainly do now.
Well, also, you don't have, without television, I suppose you have newsreels, but really you don't, people aren't, you know, the mass public is not going to be as familiar with what you're going to see pictures in a newspaper or something on a newsreel, but it's not like everyone's watching it on CNN.
Yeah, no, I mean, any movie that has come out since, I'm not trying to think if The Man did this as closely, but, you know, the the sofas in the Oval Office, I feel like every movie nails the like kind of boring looking sofas that are actually in there. You know, they know exactly what to do now, but at the time it was like, no one cares what the Oval Office actually looks like, so we'll give them a close approximation.
Yeah. But I wasn't watching it for the accuracy.
No, but it's something that I think about because we've seen so many things that feature recreations of the inside of the White House, and seeing how some of them have, a lot of them have they share the same set, and some of them just have very similar ones, and you kind of see the differences between them. It's just interesting to kind of observe that, especially as we're watching a lot of these different president movies. Not that Air Force One had any Oval Office scenes, but
but The Man and Dave certainly did.
Certainly, yeah. And so, yes, the beginning of this movie, he is just his regular self, and he's kind of, I don't know, a jerk. He's a nice guy, but he should not be president. And actually, this is one exchange that I wanted to play, mirroring that.
Did I keep my promise, Jed? Well, I'm in the White House and considerably worried. Why? When I think of all the promises I made the people to get elected. Oh, you had to make some promises. By the time they realize you're not going to keep me, your term will be over.
Yeah.
He's the figurehead for the party. I don't believe it's ever specified. Yeah, I mean, it's all about the party. There's, they are very clear about that.
Yeah.
And very clear about what they want him to do as president, what their agenda is.
Yeah, and I'm going to play another clip, and this is his very first meeting with the members of the press. They all kind of just gather into a tiny little room, and it's a little bit different from the way that we see it nowadays, but it's pretty interesting, and you'll just see how he's not interested in actually doing anything.
Does the president intend to grant John Bronson an interview?
The president didn't catch the name. John Bronson, the leader of all the unemployed.
The president considers John Bronson a dangerous anarchist. If he comes near the White House, he will be arrested.
The president hasn't forgotten that Bronson heads 1 million men who are armed and unemployed. In the last count, there were 270 camps of these men in the public parks of our largest cities.
The president considers the whole question of unemployment a local problem.
Is the administration going to take any action on the racketeering that's rampant in the country? Are notorious gangsters like Nick Diamond going to get away with it?
My party also regards Nick Diamond and all racketeers as local problems. We choose to believe that bootlegging and all forms of racketeering will disappear as soon as the public become educated to respect the 18th Amendment.
Mr. Thiessen.
Mr. President, my paper's indictment against the government is a staggering one. Starvation and want is everywhere, from coast to coast and from Canada to Mexico. Millions of dollars are poured into new battleships. Farmers burn corn and wheat. Food is thrown away into the sea while men and women are begging for bread. Men are freezing without coats while cotton rots in the fields. Thousands of homeless. Millions of vacant homes. Over 5,000 gangland murders last year, yet only 5 gangsters in prison. Not for killing, but for income tax violation. What does the new administration say to this? What answer? What definite plan has the government to this indictment? This tale of misery and horror, of lost hope, of broken faith, of the collapse of the American democracy.
Young man, I shall answer you directly. And through you, I shall speak to all of my countrymen. America will weather this depression as she has weathered other depressions. Through the spirit of Valley Forge, the spirit of Gettysburg, and the spirit of the Argonne. The American people have risen before, and they will rise again. Gentlemen, remember, our party promises a return to prosperity.
May the president be quoted?
The president may not be quoted.
Yeah, and that's a big thing about him refusing to be quoted.
Well, refusing to be, it's so crazy. Like that clip, that press conference foreshadows so much of what happens throughout the rest of the film.
Oh, it lays out everything. And it's,
absolutely.
Yeah, and so this is right before he gets into this car accident. He is, as they say, the first president to ever drive himself, and he's just like speeding down the road and gets into an accident, and the doctors are just like, yeah, no, he gonna die. And then some like wind goes through the window and the curtain blows a little bit and something just changes in him and he just wakes up a different person. And, his views on everything are completely flipped around. And he has this sudden urge to do right and to solve world peace.
And he also he goes from viewing John Bronson, who's the leader of, they call him the Army of the Unemployed.
Yeah.
And he goes from painting John Bronson as public enemy number one to seeing his cause as like his top priority. And
yeah.
And he wants to, reach out and he wants to connect with all of these unemployed people and be the president of those people and not just be someone who's, I guess, just keeping the status quo.
Yeah.
Which is what he's been doing. He's keeping the powerful in power and leaving people like Nick Diamond alone and upholding the 18th Amendment prohibition.
Yeah, and it's like he believes in trickle-down society. And it's just like, the people who are, up on top and have jobs will prosper and everything will work itself out. And the people who don't have jobs, they're going to lift themselves by the bootstraps and they're going to figure it out themselves. It's the American way. And it's just like a total BS statement, putting it onto everybody else. Yeah.
Just invoking the American Revolution, the Civil War, and all that. And he's just full of shit.
Totally. Yeah. So the theory, and I'm actually going to play a little clip from this, but after he has kind of made all these changes, and this comes just a little bit later, but I want to talk a little bit about Beak and Pendy. Beekman, who's his secretary, and Pendy, who is Beak's assistant, but at the beginning of the movie, she's just like the president's
mistress.
Well,
mistress.
Not mistress. Well, not mistress because he's not married, but like, his lover. And then after everything changes, he's, he no longer calls her Pendy. He calls her Miss Malloy. He makes a big deal about calling Beekman Beak at the beginning, and then he starts calling him Beekman. And so I'm just going to play a quick little clip of Beak and Pendy having a little chat.
What's the matter, Pendy?
I've just seen something. He didn't know his own words, Beak.
What?
And then he lifted his head, for all the world as if he were listening. There was something in the room that made me shiver. And then he just smiled and said, yes, of course.
What do you think it means?
Well, we felt from the beginning that the president was really two men. But I became aware somehow tonight of a third being. I know that sounds impossible. I'm not a very religious person, Beak, but does it seem too fanciful to believe that God might have sent the angel Gabriel to do for Judd Hammond what he did for Daniel?
Gabriel? I thought he was a messenger of wrath.
Not always. To some, he was the angel of revelations, sent as a messenger from God to men.
Gabriel over the White House.
Had to get that titular line in there.
Well, of course, yes. The nudge, nudge, wink, wink there.
Yeah. And honestly, it's like, okay, that's what this movie is kind of about. It's like, it's the mechanism to get all the other points across. And I think that it's effective, and I like the way that she says that she's not a religious person. Otherwise it makes it sound like, you know what? I know exactly what this is. It's the angel Gabriel. But her skepticism about like the existence of that type of thing is, makes it feel a little bit more like the audience watching it.
Yeah. It's legitimate, and I guess so. A lot of while watching this movie, I just was making so many comparisons and connections to recent history, to the Trump presidency, to what's been happening with the impeachment hearings, with Republicans, I guess putting party over country, and that's what they say in the cabinet meeting after he gets into the accident. And they say no matter what happens, the party comes first.
Yeah, not to be just like playing clips all the time, but let's just hear a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Am I late? No, you're not. What's all the rush about? I don't know myself. Oh, why didn't he see us before? We've been waiting for him for 2 weeks.
Yes, don't forget, Judd's been a sick man.
Now, boys, let me handle this situation. All right. I've known Judd longer than any of you. He's been a very sick man, and we've got to humor him.
Yes, but we got to think of the party.
Yes. Well, no matter what happens, the party comes first.
Gentlemen, President.
Good. You're looking nice to have you back. Please admit all condolences. Conserve your sympathy for the people of the United States who are in dire need of it. Sit down, gentlemen. We're confronted with an ugly situation, Judd. A lot of things have come up since your accident.
Yes, I know.
I mean the Army of the Unemployed. Bronson and his gang.
Yes, I know. They're getting ready to march on Washington, 1 million strong.
We didn't think you knew.
Naturally.
I call on you as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy. Give me authority to mobilize and keep these ruffians in their camps.
You want to declare war?
We've got to uphold the law.
What law?
Something must be done at once or this armed mob will descend on us. Run riot all over Washington.
Every citizen of the United States should be ensured the elementary necessities for keeping life within his body. This cabinet, every member of Congress, each office holder, is answerable directly to the public conscience. Gentlemen, I refuse to call out the army against the people of the United States.
And I refuse to accept that.
Discussion on this subject is closed.
Now be careful. I might resign on you.
Your resignation is accepted.
Oh, well, now, wait a minute, Judge. I was only suggesting...
Your resignation is accepted. You have my permission to withdraw.
I love it. I love how he's just like, I'm not going to take any bull from any of you. Oh, you want to resign? Fine. You're fired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. He does it later on when they're getting ready to, they're talking about the 25th Amendment.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I could just play clip after clip after clip. The one thing that I wanted to mention, though, going back to what you were talking about with our most recent administration, the Trump presidency, just imagining what if, like, during that eclipse, when he looked up directly at the eclipse, he actually like slipped into like some sort of coma, and the angel Gabriel took over his body, but actually bestowed wrath rather than glory, like in this movie. But the wrath instead, like the way that Beak suggested.
Yeah, I mean, no, but it's crazy because he goes like, you're rooting for him as he goes to Baltimore where the Army of the Unemployed is as they're marching towards Washington, and he goes to be with the people. Yeah. And you're really rooting for him. And then he basically like goes in front of Congress, and they're like, we're not going to have
screw it. I'm just going to play it.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I am here as a representative of the American people in their hour of darkest despair. A plant cannot be made to grow by watering the top alone and letting the roots go dry.
Trickle down.
The people of this country are the roots of the nation, and the sturdy trunk and the branches too.
You have spent $4 billion only to aggravate adversity. I ask for $4 billion to restore buying power, stimulate purchases, restore prosperity. You have wasted precious days and weeks and years in futile discussion. We need action, immediate and effective action.
Mr. President, there is a movement in Congress for your impeachment. Hardly the time for making any requests, however small.
Very well. I shall withdraw that request, but I would like to substitute another. I ask you, gentlemen, to declare a state of national emergency and to adjourn this Congress until normal conditions are restored. During the period of that adjournment, I shall assume full responsibility for the government.
Mr. President, this is dictatorship.
Senator Langham, words do not frighten me.
But the United States of America is a democracy.
We are not yet ready to give up the government of our father. You have given it up. You've turned your backs. You've closed your ears to the appeals of the people. You've been traitors to the concepts of democracy upon which this government was founded. I believe in democracy as Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln believed in democracy. And if what I plan to do in the name of the people makes me a dictator, then it is a dictatorship based on Jefferson's definition of democracy, a government for the greatest good of the greatest number.
This Congress refuses to adjourn.
I think, gentlemen, you forget that I am still the President of these United States. And as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, it is within the rights of the President to declare the country under martial law.
Yeah, so, and I apologize, I said 25th Amendment before. There was no 25th Amendment at this point.
Yeah.
I meant impeachment. And this is where it gets really, like, for me as an audience member, this was one of my holy shit moments where I was just like, he's got the right idea, but he's going too far. He's declaring martial law. He establishes the federal police, which is like the Gestapo.
Yeah.
And it's this, which, by the way, we are in March 1933. Hitler in January 33 becomes Chancellor of Germany, and March 1933 is when his powers really expand with a lot of the same rhetoric and a lot of that, that, like, you know, the people are suffering, and it's so tricky. And for, like, I'm not that well versed in the cinema of the 1930s, but like, it's so ambiguous, and so there's so much of a conflict in, like, I really want to root for this guy.
Yeah.
But he's not letting democracy take its course, where the people, and I mean, it's like today, there's so much with Citizens United, there's so much money and gerrymandering and redistricting. There's so much corruption, not to say that there wasn't then, but there's so much corruption that keeps there from being a fair and honest election in many cases. That, I mean, if you look at, you know, the governor's election of Georgia, you know, or for Florida, you know, along with a lot of other elections that have happened in recent memory. It's interesting that to go back this far and see him saying, like, democracy is not working right now, and maybe to say, like, especially if he was just elected, if this is like the first year of his term, that like we can't wait that long, and there's an emergency, there's a national emergency, and he declares martial law and like shuts down Congress. And
yeah. And like, here's the thing is, who knows what this movie would have been had it been made a year later, you know, with the benefit of hindsight. Whereas at the time, this was likely written, you know, before Hitler really started to rise to power. But also, you also have to remember that this isn't the character President Hammond speaking as himself. This is, if we are to go along with this theory, that it is the angel Gabriel, you know, speaking through him. So this is essentially like, humans messed up Earth. God tells Gabriel, go fix it, do it through this guy. And, you know, it's not a person who's saying, you know, tearing down their own country's, you know, foundation of democracy. It's another being who's just kind of like, you know, erasing the chalkboard and redrawing everything.
Well, except that it's not, and yeah, I guess it does have this global reach because he has the Washington Covenant, the agreement that all of the world leaders sign, that he kind of strong arms them into signing.
Oh yeah, totally. He threatens them.
Yeah. And it's crazy because he's still, and with recent memory, it's kind of like thinking like, well, what if one person had multiple personalities and it was like one side is Trump and the other side is Bernie? Yeah. Because we've heard Trump talk about countries paying their debts.
Yeah.
And that's something that he says, those debts have got to be paid.
Well, like I said, you know, we have 90 years of knowledge of what actually has happened, you know, that this movie, it seems like a fantasy, you know, to imagine that there would be a lot of these, you know, conversations that actually do happen. And some of them, like you said, happen very soon after.
Well, yeah. And, not to keep rolling the clips here, but, you know, he talks, and this is, you know, we're post World War. This is, you know, 14 years after World War I.
Right.
And, you know, and a lot of that, like understanding how much debt that put most of, you know, pretty much all of Europe into, especially Germany, and that debt led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. And then, because you have to look at how in I think it was 1924 was when Hitler first tried to stage a coup.
Right. Yeah.
And then got put in prison for like, I don't know, less than a year, wrote his book. And we all know what happened from there on in.
We all know what happened. Yeah, but listening to... let me set the stage here. So they've moved this is like the World Leaders Conference, and it was moved to a yacht. And actually Hammond has microphones there to broadcast it over the radio, because he's like, no, this can't be private. Everyone has to be able to hear what we're saying, because we have to be held accountable. And it's such a ballsy move. But when he explains how every nation needs to pay their debts from the Great War, this is what happens when Germany speaks up.
One of the reasons that we entered the Great War was to secure the end of secret diplomacy, to establish throughout the world a fixed policy of open covenants, openly arrived at. Gentlemen, we are at least today fulfilling this great purpose. We are taking the world into our confidence. I will open this conference on the question of war debts with a brief statement of America's side of the controversy. These debts were incurred to save the debtor nations from destruction. The money they received, they pledged their honor to repay. Then the debtor pleaded poverty. The United States compromised the debts by half. This remaining half, debtor nations solemnly signed agreements to pay. Gentlemen, are you prepared to pay those debts?
For Germany to pay her debts means more taxes on her half-starved people. They may burst into open revolution.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, and then just a few minutes later, he talks about
what happens if they don't pay their debts.
Well, he talks about that. He talks about the evolution of weaponry, and he tells you what's going to happen in World War II.
The next war will depopulate the earth. Invisible poison gases, inconceivably devastating explosives, annihilating death rays will sweep to utter destruction not only the men, but the children who would constitute another generation and the mothers who bear them. Unless man's God-given faculty for utilizing the forces of nature for beneficent purposes shall surpass their vicious genius for destruction, the race of man shall perish from the earth, and the earth shall be left to the less cruel, the less destructive, and the less stupid wild animals. People of the world, I speak to you. Shall we save this world? Shall we restore it to a condition where it can truly be said that there is peace on earth, goodwill toward men? Shall the United States of America build such a navy to force peace? Or shall the other nations agree to eliminate their armaments, balance their budgets, restore honor among nations? The United States would be glad to fall in line with such a movement, but only after the other nations have proven their good faith by convincing action. The very fate of our civilization rests here and now, where it belongs, in the hands of the people of the world.
Damn.
Well, and before this, he talk about ballsy. He takes out 2 U.S. battleships that there's no one on them.
Right.
He says, they're radio controlled. There's no one on there, and he's got planes flying overhead.
Yeah,
and
which
he's
looks really cool.
Yeah,
for 1933.
Well, they dive bomb these 2 ships and blow up these ships in front of this whole conference.
Yeah, because he's talking about antiquated, military weaponry. Yeah.
Well, and he's like, we spend all this money on these things, and next thing you know, there's on to the next thing. So where's all this money going? And he convinces the world to disarm.
Yeah. It's wild.
It is absolutely wild.
It's funny because when I was watching this and that scene happened and he gave that speech, I was just wide-eyed, jaw on the floor, just being like, what year did this come out? This is
I know,
wild.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's there is some dystopian shit in there too.
Yeah.
Coming back to the federal police when they arrest Nick Diamond.
Yeah, so I'm gonna play this is so many clips on this one. I promise that some of these are a little short, but
I assume I imagine most people haven't seen it.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I hope that you're all benefiting from these clips. But so the president meets with Nick Diamond, the world's biggest racketeer gangster, and he ultimately tells him just all right, just so you know, you're totally effed and we're coming after you. And then what happens is, I want to say that Nick Diamond's cronies come and shoot up the front doors of the White House. Yeah, because they get Pendy. And this is a scene that where Beak is kind of comforting Pendy, and from the beginning that he's got the hots for her because there's a very male-gazy shot when she first walks in of him checking her out. But then she's off with the president, and he's like, well, nope. But then after the president becomes a different person, he kind of takes a shot and gives her a kiss and everything. And then this is the moment that comes after that.
Beekman, you're fired. I've got a better job for you. It's only a temporary one. I'm forming a mobile unit of the United States Army to be known as the Federal Police to eliminate gangsters. I want you to head that unit. Yes, sir. I need a man who has suffered a terrible personal hurt. A man whose energy and efficiency will be at white heat. A man ruthless and merciless.
Yeah. And then right after that, he's like, so I guess you'll have to postpone the wedding. And it's they just had their first kiss.
Well, we don't know that. Is it their
It
first
seems
kiss?
like it's from what we see, and
Well, because the way that they talk, I mean, also in that scene, Beak is like, oh, so you know about us? And he's just like, yes, it's fine.
yeah.
He's like, yes, that's fine. That's great because, you know,
my
you two
vibe,
work.
like the way that I saw it was like they have clearly had an attraction to each other and they spend a ton of time together, but have never actually like, you know, made contact until that moment. But who knows? It's a make-believe movie.
Sometimes it just takes a bunch of gangsters shooting up the front of the White House.
I mean, know.
Yeah,
It's a classic story.
I don't know what security. Yeah, who hasn't? Yeah. So, and I don't know what security was at the White House initially.
What year did the Secret Service begin?
Yeah, you don't really see the secret. You don't really see Secret Service.
I don't think that I don't think it was maybe around at this point. Yeah, you look that up. And I'll play another clip. This is from...
It just might have been secret. I don't know.
It's that secret that you just don't even see them and they don't even do their jobs. But so then what happens is there's a giant raid using these like tanks to capture Nick Diamond and to get some of his guys. So here is the trial of Nick Diamond with Beak. And this is a very cool looking scene too. It's like not a normal looking courtroom or anything. It's like very futuristic looking actually. And the
Dystopian.
camera, it's very dystopian. And the camera angles and the camera movement is, for this time, really fascinating. So this is the trial of Nick Diamond.
This court is convinced that you have, as part of your racketeering and extortion, committed some 23 homicides. Murders. With your own hands. You have instigated dozens more. Yet by bribery, by technicalities of the law, you've escaped all punishment. You're the last of the racketeers, Diamond, and why? Because we have in the White House a man who's enabled us to cut the red tape of legal procedures and get back to first principles. An eye for an eye, Nick Diamond. A tooth for a tooth. A life for a life.
And then comes the firing squad.
With the Statue of Liberty in the background.
It's wild. Guys,
wow.
You gotta watch this movie.
Check this shit out if you haven't seen it. And just to throw in here, so the Secret Service, as one might have guessed, was formed in 1865.
Oh, okay.
Well,
yeah,
you know,
that makes
when a
sense.
president gets assassinated,
Yeah.
you're kind of like, we should have some people.
That makes sense. But I guess similarly to how this movie wasn't so concerned about getting the Oval Office dialed in right, they maybe were a little less concerned about how they depicted the Secret Service, if at all.
Yeah,
There's like
I mean,
a couple guys with him at certain points, but like the president is certainly not heavily bodyguarded the way that we're used to seeing it now.
No, and I might have, and you know, it's you could infer that perhaps he has, because he's just kind of he's sent Congress home, so maybe he's just I don't need the secret. I've survived a car crash.
Yeah, I'm literally an angel, so like I'm good.
Yeah. So, but yeah, they drive up. I mean, regardless of Secret Service, there's I guess no front gate security.
Nope.
Either that or they're on the payroll. And by the way, it's hard for me to hear the word racketeer without thinking of the Rocketeer.
The Rocketeer. Oh, totally. Yeah.
Speaking of, I guess, organized crime and Nazis and things like that.
Yeah, they were there.
Not that we're talking about Nazis, but
well,
although federal police, but
yeah.
that federal police trial and like Beekman, who's just eating it up.
Yeah, you know, like I said, if this was made a few years later, I think it would have gone down very differently. I can't imagine that the parallels, you know, would have been made exactly when this was being made. You know, sometimes it takes, you know, a few years or maybe not even that long, but to realize like, you know, this is a little similar to what's going on and that's a really bad thing. So maybe we dial this back. But, you know, and as we know, a lot of people didn't know the severity of what was going on until quite some time later, you know, unless you were really in it.
And this was just before, well, yeah, there was no 24-hour news cycle. There was no internet.
Not everybody was Captain Von Trapp, who, saw what was going on.
Christopher Plummer. All right.
Pour one out.
Yeah, and then it's also at this point, like when they made Hitler chancellor, the history teacher is gonna come out here.
Yeah.
When Hitler was made chancellor, it was largely to appease his base, which was not the way that democracy ran. It wasn't a two-party system in, especially in the 20s in Germany. So like when the Nazi party first started, running candidates, they were getting, like a small percentage, and you would get like, maybe one seat in the Reichstag, and they'd be, okay, good. So we have your voice. Those people are represented by that one person, and they can't do any good. And a lot of the decision making that went into appointing Hitler as chancellor, not president, he was not ruling the country yet, but they convinced President von Hindenburg to make him chancellor because they were like, this way you can keep an eye on him.
Oh, yeah.
And you can maybe you're like, he's got a following. So this way you put him in a position of power, you keep an eye on him, and, maybe he'll grow into it. Maybe. Right. And I kid you not. That was that was the arguments that were being made. So, but here you've got the president who's really, you've got a president who goes from being all about small government and, well, that's a local problem. That's a local problem.
Yeah.
And then he's sending Congress home, and he's openly
like, I'll take care of it myself.
All right, if it's going to be a dictatorship, fine. It's going to be a dictatorship. And it's going to be a dictatorship that's going to help people, which honestly is how dictatorships start, because that's how dictators take power. They appeal to the poor, to the starving masses, the unemployed, and say like, I will do this. I can do this for you. And it's fascinating because you're like, it's so, the intentions are so good, and he's like got this great plan to put people to work, but wow, it's dangerous territory. And I think that, and I asked myself a lot as I was watching this, what the director, Gregory LaCava, what was his, I was like, what did he believe? What did he think? By the way, he was nominated twice for Best Academy Award for Best Director for My Man Godfrey and Stage Door. And I just thought, I was like, is this what he would want? Or is he showing, like, especially the trial and then the firing squad,
right?
Is he showing that if we put too much power in one person's hands, it gets despite their intentions? Is that are we heading into dangerous territory?
Yeah. Well, something also to think about. So this is adapted from a novel that came out the same year, that was written by Thomas F. Tweed, who was a British soldier in World War I. And he was the political advisor to David Lloyd George from 27 until he died. So he's kind of taking this from his, experience in the military, and maybe it was kind of like the fantasy of like, how could we get all these things that we want? Like, what are going to be the effects of this war that I fought in? And, as far as I can tell, he doesn't have any allegiance to the Third Reich. He seemed to be on the right side of things, but, it seems to me like it's just genuinely a fantasy of, getting world peace and, religious allegory included.
Yeah, and that's really, I mean, the last thing that happens, and I guess that's kind of the argument for the fantasy that the angel Gabriel, also played in film by Christopher Walken in The Prophecy,
right?
Much different version, is that he dies right after signing this document that I guess is meant to ensure world peace.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know, it's not an unexpected moment, but
no, it's very much like the end of Dave. He does what he needs to do, and then in Dave, he is acting, as having a stroke and passing things on to the, setting things right so that it can go on to this, to Vice President Nance, who is going to do a great job as president, and it's just like,
we don't even know who the vice president is in this.
No, it's a guy at the beginning who's just like, all right, I'm the vice president. See ya.
Yep. To go do my vice president thing.
Yeah, he's just, it's right after the inauguration, and he's like shaking hands with everyone, and he's like, I hope I do he's like, my vice president, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I hope I sleep well tonight. And he makes some joke about like, well, as vice president, that's kind of all you have to be concerned with or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you shouldn't have any problems.
Well, and so you brought up Dave, and that kind of segues us into what do we do with this?
Yeah.
Because Dave comes across as like a very loose remake of this.
So it's interesting that you say that. And I wanted to mention that, I wrote it down in my notes somewhere, but there we go. Okay, so Arthur Byron, who plays the Secretary of State, Jasper Brooks, the final movie that he was in was The Prisoner of Zenda, which is the same plot as Dave. The person who did the score for Gabriel Over the White House, the very first thing he did was the score to the original Prisoner of Zenda in the 20s. And, it's a very frequently remade thing, and that's the same plot as Dave and Moon Over Parador. And, so it's interesting to me that there's, a lot of these similar themes going on and all these connections to kind of the same material that comes up time and time again. And, when I was watching it, I of course was thinking of like, how could this come back? And I, as we're talking about Dave, want to mention, if you remember, one of my ideas from Dave alludes to the moment where Larry King is interviewing Oliver Stone, who seems to have figured out that this has gone on. I would love to also see an Oliver Stone movie all about the Hammond presidency and how there's this theory that it was actually like a, dissociative identity disorder, split personality type thing. I mean, I don't think that he's going to bring in, Gabriel into the conversation, but maybe like it's mentioned as somebody's theory, but it's like, setting something, an Oliver Stone movie in the world where this took place. But my other idea, the one that I guess was more forward in my mind, is what does the world look like about 90 years after a Hammond presidency? Like, what is this world like? Do we regress back into, this maybe two-party system and, constant war debt and glorification of the military and, advancement of military weaponry and things like that, and just constant spending and organized crime and, so that's kind of where my mind went, is just like, what is the result of this almost 100 years in the future? And, of course, I thought of people like Alex Garland or Denis Villeneuve who could, who have done things about this kind of like futuristic world that we could be living in. And I don't know, that's kind of where my mind was. How about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because I couldn't get the idea, the thought of Dave out of my head. But thinking about how the pendulum kind of swings back and forth.
Right.
And we tend to go from the more progressive or liberal to more conservative. And, you know, sometimes and as with an actual pendulum, the further it swings in one direction, the further it swings in the other. So what if you had and I don't think I was thinking quite as far into the future. And I was thinking more of like, you know, an alternate 1950 or something where World War II maybe doesn't happen when it happened.
Yeah.
But maybe you have a organized crime figure.
Yeah.
Who goes legit and comes to power and wins the presidency. And I mean that in like, you know, someone like a Nick Diamond who.
Right. Yeah, because the system of government in the U.S. has been totally torn down by Hammond.
Well, and now there's also precedent for that.
Yeah.
So even if, and also like Hammond is not going to be, you know, president. So who knows? The vice president could come in and undo everything.
He wakes up from his sleep after the inauguration and is just like, oh, that was a long one. What did I miss?
What happened? Yeah. So I think that's the way to go with this is what happens when you have the precedent set that the president can do all these things.
Yeah.
And I mean, because you also have to think like from these policies, how many people that make up like, you know, the rich and powerful are still going to be rich and powerful, but now they're really their wealth and power is somewhat threatened. And like, what do they do to adapt? And I feel like it just would swing back. But now do you end up having the country in a worse place?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you have that's leading? Who do you have that comes to power in the wake of this? I mean, what he dies and what happens? Who brings, you know, does Congress come back in session?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And it's, you know, movies now maybe would give you more closure, but I feel like older movies, even going back to like The Man, it's like, all right, we've finished that storyline and, you know, we don't know what happens next. And I mean, the book tells you a lot more, but, you know, it's similar situation here where it's just like, all right, we have wrapped up all of the things that we wanted to do in this movie and that's it, the end.
He dies, and I'm not even roll credits because this was made in 1933. So it's just
they've already rolled the credits. Yeah.
So I think that, and I don't know that I would go with like the immediate, because also you would have this whole thing like, well, we got to make good on all this stuff because he has, you know, all the world leaders he signed his name to the paper.
Yeah.
So, but again, we don't know what the wording of this document is and how many, you know, representatives, how many Congress people are looking for loopholes in it.
Yeah.
How many do you have like the CEO of the, you know, company that I'm like the company that makes battleships.
Oh yeah.
Milton Bradley.
Yeah.
Do they like, is this person like, well, I guess there's only one way to get things back the way they were. I'm going to run for president, which also kind of echoes the Trump presidency in that during Obama's presidency, so much of what happened with environmental regulations and pushing towards what we're calling the Green New Deal kind of, shifted the focus of wealth from fossil fuel corporations and companies over to, renewable energy. And you had, Trump, the war on coal is over.
Yeah.
Didn't know there was a war on coal, but hey, and him coming into power and removing a lot of the environmental protections and swinging things back to that old wealth and that old power. And it's really this battle between progress and the struggle to keep, there's the struggle for progress, but then there's also the struggle to keep the status quo, to hang on to the status quo no matter what, which I see it as, change is inevitable. I think progress is inevitable, and trying to suppress it might work in the short term. But in the end, I think progress happens. It's just a matter of what the cost of it is. So do we end up having like a political battle between the wealthy, the old? Do we have like more? Does our sequel to Gabriel over the White House, Gabriel's back again? Gabriel's back. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do we have a more extreme version of two-party politics, whereas really, like, a lot of Democrats are more towards the middle, and we're starting to see more progressive Democrats being elected to Congress and being appointed by Biden. But does our sequel to Gabriel over the White House leave us with really, like, a more of a socialist party,
right,
up against a not just a quote unquote Republican party, but like capitalist, capitalist party? Do we really? Because so much of this is focused on, the war is on, like, war and battle, and those costs are almost an after. They're related to the employment issue, but the unemployment issue and the depression is really what's pushing this and getting people back to work. So, maybe 10, 20 years later, like, we are socialist. Maybe it's the, like, socialist United States of America.
The Hamidists,
That right? Yeah. The Hamidists and the I don't know.
No one else really has a name that's mentioned.
No. The other. But like, instead of Republican Democrat, do you really have like a balls out socialist party and capitalist party?
Or is it a world like the future of Bill and Ted, where it's all just governed by music and everything just works?
Be excellent to each other.
That's
That's really what Hammond wants.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be excellent to each other.
Absolutely. That's right. Yeah. And you mentioned the tie between, the Depression and, military spending and stuff like that. But it's just like, they lay it out in that very first press conference, and those are the three issues that people are concerned about. And so this movie is going to address those very three issues. And, maybe they're connected, maybe they're not, but that's just what they chose to do. Because everybody loves a good gangster. So you got to have that
certainly, they're certainly connected. And, like, the repealing prohibition leads to, he's saying, like, why shouldn't these people, have a drink,
Yeah. Well, anyway, great movie. Please watch it.
Yes.
These clips don't do it justice. It's a really fascinating watch. And for any of the the junkies out there for pre-code cinema, talking about the Hays Code that kind of came into play in 34. It went from 34 to like 68. Bonnie and Clyde being kind of like one of the straws that broke the camel's back, and I just looked it up. I can't remember what the first movie that was post Hays Code was, but it's a Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, I think. But it's really interesting because the Hays Code was essentially pre MPAA. Where it was basically just like, movies can't have these things, no nudity or too much drinking and blah, 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 and whatever. And pre-code, and that was in response to these movies that came out before 1934 that were just like, breaking rules that hadn't been invented yet. And when, it was finally decided, like, maybe instead of just censoring everything, we create this system where it's like, just so you know, this movie's going to have this stuff in it, so look out.
Well, yeah, and these movies, according to the code, had to push like a quote unquote appropriate morals. And I mean, like, straight up, I think what they would be called like Christian morals, yeah. I think. And in fact, they're just looking at an article here from Men's Health, of course, the authority on cinema.
Yeah.
But where it actually was shown that Joseph Breen began heading the production code administration in 34 and was apparently anti-Semitic and blamed Jewish studio heads for the perceived decadence in films.
Oh, it's Soros.
So, Soros. Did you get your check? No.
Oh.
Soros and his space lasers.
Yeah. Also, and I believe that right after the Hays Code kind of got removed and replaced with the MPAA, that's when like Midnight Cowboy, an X-rated movie, wins the Academy Award. So it's like it's further cementing that this is a system that shouldn't be put in place. And yeah, there's a lot of pre-code cinema junkies out there who have probably seen Gabriel at over the White House, and and now we've seen it too, and we hope that you do.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say the code went away and Hollywood went balls out, literally.
Yeah. So, Dan, this thus concludes our month of fictional president movies. It's been a really fun ride. I'm glad that we kind of went a little all over the place.
I love that we went off the beaten path with The Man and Gabriel Over the White House.
Yeah. There's certainly so many other president movies that, we could devote an entire podcast to. And I believe that there are some podcasts that are just devoted to fake president movies. So anyway, I'm wondering if any of them have or will cover Gabriel Over the White House. But Dan, let's talk about what we're going to be doing, not just next week on the podcast, but our March theme.
Yeah, so our March theme, and I mean, John, this is kind of your brainchild here, is films whose titles have become part of the common vernacular, the
modern lexicon. Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, yeah, it's something that fascinates me, is that a word or phrase can come into everyday vocabulary that did not exist before a movie made it exist. And we will not only be talking about movies whose titles have this type of thing, but also movies that have words or phrases in them that did not exist before these movies. Not that we're going to do a whole movie about them, but for example, like, if not for the movie American Pie, we would not have the word MILF. So, right. And think about how often you see and hear that, ever since American Pie came out. So
If not for Cannibal the Musical, we would not have Spadoinkle.
Spadoinkle, that's right. Yeah, so
so we're gonna kick it off with Rob Reiner's film The Bucket List, starring Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, and it's funny because two people who have been fictional presidents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deep Impact, Mars Attacks.
Was that Angel Has Fallen, or what is it? There's like
was he also the president in the Has Fallen movies?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's
But yeah, so Bucket List I think is a really interesting one because people don't realize that before this movie came out, like 20 years ago? Not even?
2007.
Yeah, okay, so not even. It didn't exist. This wasn't a thing. It was created by this movie, and I think that's really fun. And I've never seen it, so I'm really excited to check it out. And if anybody has any movies that they want us to cover that fit this description, email us ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com. We have a list right now that has 4 on it, and there are 5 Tuesdays in March, and we release on Tuesdays. So we still have one more slot that we want to fill. So if you have any, ruinchildhoodspod@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram @ruinchildhoodspod, Twitter is @ruined_pod. Find our merch on tpublic.com. Maybe we'll make a Gabriel over the White House shirt. Maybe a Hammond for President bumper sticker.
I would love that. I think this is a movie. This is a movie that more people should know about, and I hope that we've done our job in spreading awareness of Gabriel over the White House.
Yeah. So Dan, as you and President Hammond are zipping down the road at a hot 90 miles per hour, I bid you a good journey.
Good journey, and have a spadoinkle day.
Do you hear that playing?
Yes, I hear that playing.
Do you know who's playing?
No, who is that playing?
Why, it's Gabriel playing. Gabriel saying, will you be ready to go when I blow my horn?